Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Mark Patterson. I'm the Executive Director of Magnet, and I have with me Adam Morrison from OTEC, and we'll get started. Again, we apologize for the slight delay, but thank you for joining us. So we're here for a quick webinar, and I'm going to ask Adam to explain a little bit about what OTEC does and who OTEC is and the work that they do in the hospitality and tourism sector.
Thanks so much, Mark. So OTEC is Ontario's tourism and hospitality workforce development organization. We were formed in the early 90s by a coalition representing the government, industry, and the academic sector, really to be a liaison between those bodies and to work on tourism and hospitality sectoral workforce strategy and implementation in the province. We're also the lead for an alliance called Tourism Skills Net Ontario, which is essentially a network, an alliance of various consortia, so workforce development working groups across the province that collaborate under a single framework and really communications, evaluation, and collaboration structure for the sector.
Great. Well, again, thank you for being here. We're going to get to some questions from the participants later, and we'll ask the participants to raise their hand, and we'll unmute them. The host will unmute them. But for now, just really interested to hear your perspective on, the impact on your sector of the crisis we're going through, and what you're learning, what you're finding out. We're all hearing what's happening in the news, but really interested to get your perspective on what's going on.
So I think a big part of the story is a before and after. So, historically, our sector has represented about 10% of the Canadian workforce. We're a large and fairly diverse industry. 40% of that market exists within the province of Ontario. We generate in Ontario $34 billion in receipts. We contribute $11.8 billion in tax revenue. We have 188,000 businesses in the province that are working within the sector. And we've been a really important contributor to economic development. We've also had a really important role on youth, and I think it's a little known one. We've been predominantly the top sector where Canada and Ontario's youth have really gotten their start in the workplace. So roughly 27% of Canadians in general get their start in tourism and hospitality and frontline service sector roles. And that's really important because they take those initial experiential opportunities, the learning, the training, and they take that with them over the course of their entire careers. Many do move on, but what they take with them is a number of technical skills, but they also take with them a lot of the most important foundational social and soft skills that really are increasingly in demand by every sector. So things like team building, customer service, sales, critical thinking. These are all skills that are gained organically within our industry just by the very nature of it. So, it's for those critical reasons, the role we've played in the economy, that it's so troubling what's been happening over the past, and it's amazing to even say 6 weeks. Over 6 weeks, it's all happening in real time. So depending on when the last survey was taken, the stats are very different. But in Ontario, the change between February and March, we're seeing a loss of 176,000 jobs in this province. But even more recent, some survey and research conducted by Restaurants Canada reveals that even since then, moving into April, we've lost 800,000 jobs in the food service industry alone, with 300,000 of those being in Ontario. And the numbers keep changing every single day. So it's really an incredible impact. We're seeing that that businesses are closing every single day, and roughly 30% of those businesses that are surveyed anticipate having to close permanently by June. So it's an amazing impact for one sector, Certainly, healthcare and long-term care have been dramatically affected by this crisis. But tourism and hospitality has been the economic and the human cost in terms of jobs has been incredible. And we anticipate that we'll be among the last sectors to recover from this issue.
Yeah, and I think, intuitively all of us kind of understand the reasons for that. And I don't think, and I'm sure everybody on the call is concerned, and one of the reasons why they're on the call. So what are you thinking about right now as to how we could, collectively, deal not only in the short term, but maybe even medium and long term? Because as you said, I think you're probably one of the hardest hit sectors in the crisis, but also the challenge around recovery. And we know that, this sector has such an impact, not only on employment, but also on our communities, right? Our neighborhoods, so like, what are you thinking from that perspective, short, medium, long, and what are you doing maybe as OTEC? I'm kind of combining two questions here, but what are you doing as OTEC? How are you thinking about that? Who are you partnering with?
Yeah.
What's coming together?
So I think that's a good way to look at it. So right now, we are still in full-on crisis management mode. So we're looking at every possible means of providing relief and support to businesses so that they can stay open, providing them with information, how to access the various relief programs that the various levels of government are offering, including how to maintain their employees through the crisis, whether it's through furloughing or wage subsidies. So right now, everybody is full bore into the moment, but many of us are also starting to plan towards recovery. So we are exploring a fairly broad portfolio of short, mid, and long-term responses that would start to look at what are the anticipated changes. How do we re-engage the workers, the displaced workforce that has been affected by this? How do we start to really understand where the impacts are, what populations are perhaps most affected by this? It's a diverse industry. So whether it's in rural Ontario or the north or our urban centers, the issues are so diverse. We need to know where to target. Now, thinking longer term, we have to be starting to examine our very models of how we operate, whether it's at the business level or at the destination level, regional, and how we collaborate, how we share information, resources, how we invest in and coordinate our workforce. And we have to start looking at, what are the factors that underlie resilience? This is important. Again, 6 weeks is what it took to devastate one of the core industries of the economy. We have to learn from that.
Yeah, so lots of work to do. You mentioned something that kind of intrigued me, because I remember many discussions with you about the critical labor shortages in so many regions of this province prior to the crisis, where it was actually limiting growth because, for maybe a number of reasons, but hospitality and tourism sector employers could not find the talent they needed. So that's always been an issue. How do you support the hospitality and tourism workers, through the crisis, but also ensure that you have a workforce when we are in recovery as well? I mean, is that something, that's on your mind?
Definitely is. And, one of the first steps of really understanding the issue is to reach those individuals who've been displaced. So along with partners, the various members, regional delivery organizations, industry associations, we're beginning the process of reaching out and engaging and even creating a communications channel for the displaced workforce so that we can start communicating options and relief programs to them. Hospitality Workers Training Center here in Toronto has recently launched a website. and are working with their stakeholders. Tourism SkillsNet Ontario is currently active in 12 cities as well. We've watched our trainees, our graduates of programs, returning from the workplace and returning to our partners for help. And so, once again, we're beginning the process of building counseling service options for them that can be accessed remotely, exploring new reskilling and upskilling opportunities, and really starting the process from scratch so that we can understand where the best pathways could lie for them. And again, always keeping an eye on that short, mid, and long-term pathway. There are certain employment opportunities that are being made available simply by the crisis, where the society needs help, whether it's an expanded hotel facilities serving healthcare and self-isolation needs, or first responders, or whether it's in restaurants moving to food delivery to help people stay in their homes and stay safe. But we've got to begin the process, and even in the active engagement, we can start to better understand where the needs really lie.
Yeah, so I think one more question, then we'll go to questions from the participants on the webinar. So if you can put up I think if you can raise your hand, then our facilitator will be able to unmute you. But you touched on a little bit in your last comments, but are there any particular examples of innovative approaches or companies? Because I think that's really something I've been spending a lot of time thinking about. I know many people have, but how do we build more resilience? Because as bad as this is, and the numbers you've quoted are absolutely shocking and horrible that this could happen in 6 weeks, and so many individual lives are impacted. But is there, there's two things. How do we come out with more resilience in the future? And is there any silver lining? So are there any companies, restaurants, hotels, doing anything, unique that you see as a best practice? Or you mentioned, some of this already, but just curious if there's anything that stands out for you.
Well, I'll point to and I'll say it's the entire sector has really come together around the issue. There is no one organization or brand that I could point to. They're all really contributing and coming together and collaborating and sharing best practices. An example of that is we know that we have to change our training standards as OTEC and our partnership network in terms of what's the new reality in terms of health after COVID. How do we have to change the cleaning standards, for instance, and even everything including guest check-in and how food service operates within accommodations context. These are all things that the sector is working through. In terms of the types of innovations that we can work toward as an industry, ironically, many of them are not that different from some of the types of collaborations that we looked at in the face of labor shortage. Businesses working together to perhaps work share, coordinate the shifts that they might have for an individual, between a hotel and a restaurant to try and create a full-time employment for someone that works in their community. Looking back, ironically, it's been many years, but OTEC and the Hospitality Workers Training Center collaborated after the SARS epidemic, conducting cross-training so that people could be trained in one department and as well as another new department so that they could, again, create full-time employment for people trying to feed their families. So these types of principles, the common theme, whether it's in labor shortage or whether it's in a crisis of unemployment, they hold true. It's about communication and collaboration, really investing in the industry. And that, as a service sector, our workforce really is the industry. That has to be recognized.
That's great. So I can't see any hands on my side. We're using a Zoom webinar now. But Haley, if you can see any hands, if you're able to unmute. So no hands so far. Can anybody that wants to post a question, if you don't want to speak, you can actually put it in the chat box as well, and we can bring Adam into the conversation.
I think Ruth has a question here.
Okay, Ruth, go ahead.
I was wondering what some of the differences are between some of the larger employers, so larger restaurant chains and hotels, vis-a-vis smaller businesses that that are, maybe have one restaurant or a small B&B or that type of thing. What are the different challenges that each one of those groups faces?
So I think one of the foreseeable outcomes of this crisis is that small business is going to be the hardest hit. And that's a matter of liquidity and cash flow. So, we're tracking it daily. Small businesses, owned and operated businesses, restaurants, especially, they don't have the money to pay for rent. And it's something that there's been a lot of advocacy about, the rent relief for this sector, especially restaurants and hospitality at large. Now, larger corporate brands with multiple properties will still, face the hit. I think it's not, it won't be uncommon for a brand that might have 12 locations in the city to really rationalize which ones they'll maintain through this and close the ones that they cannot. But we're going to lose diversity and culture in the sector through this, because our small and mid-sized businesses are what make neighborhoods unique. That's one of the saddest features of what's going on.
Any other questions? We've got about 8 more minutes. Anybody have any other questions? Ian?
Yeah, thanks, Mark and Adam. Hopefully you can hear me fine here. Just kind of building off that last question, Adam, could you speak a little bit to maybe how digital transformation is affecting tourism and hospitality here? I've heard a lot about the rise of food delivery apps, and typically this was a supplementary revenue stream for businesses. And basically in this case, they're having to rely on it, but the commission that some of these apps or services charge is a lot too high for them to really lean into that. So even if we come back with distancing measures and restaurants are operating at, say, 30 to 50% capacity, basically how do you see that kind of business model adjusting, or what is that impact of possible transformation there? Go ahead.
It's a good question, and it is evolving. It's been in the news this week about the challenges on some of the markups that are taken by some of the food delivery apps. They're creating opportunities for many that didn't initially have a model in place for food delivery. Other restaurants are moving straight to managing the deliveries on their own. There's going to be a bit of a shakeup, because it's going to be along that curve towards recovery. We have to take into account consumer confidence. And so we may, in fact, open up, as they're discussing in the US, we might, in fact, lift some of these restrictions, but consumers really decide where they go and what, and what's going to give them the confidence to do so. It's not going to come back with like a light switch, with everybody returning en masse. So these solutions, these adaptations, are going to become more the norm as we move forward. And in addition to that, the processes of how we are served in this frontline human-centric industry is going to change dramatically as well. So there's digitization through apps, but there's also the automation of guest check-in processes, of how you'll select your food and order your food in a restaurant. These are all things that are shaking out now, and we don't know what the final stage will look like, but it won't be the same.
Yeah, I saw an interesting thing. Even if you can social distance in the initial stages and spread out, it doesn't mean that that capacity level would afford, say, a restaurant the ability to even pay for, its cost structure is just is based on a much higher level of capacity than social distancing would allow. So lots of challenges. There's a question from Jesse in the chat box, and similar kind of question. We've heard a lot about the challenge of, in long-term care with PSWs going from location to location, and by effect increasing the risk of, a spread in long-term care. And we know that in the hospitality and tourism sector, there are a lot of people that work multiple, jobs. Is that something that you're considering? Or the question in the chat is, like, that's a concern in long-term care. Is it something that's on your radar screen?
So all of this is being redesigned right now, and it's being redesigned globally. So there's recent news out of the U.S. of various adaptations that certain brands are taking to those processes. I'll say here in Ontario that the Tourism Industry Association of Ontario, OTEC, and some of our leading partners like the Ontario Restaurant, Hotel and Motel Association, Resorts of Ontario, and various regional associations and businesses have come together to form a task force to start looking at these issues. How can we make those adaptations, and how can we communicate that they're being considered, and that the safety of visitors and guests is being held paramount. How can we document that these steps are being taken and what they are? So we don't have all of the answers yet. I think in the very short term, some of the standards being applied are in some of the expanded facilities, and we're looking to healthcare. We need long-term solutions that are somewhat of a hybrid of healthcare and hospitality standards.
Well, I'm sure there's so many things that the operators or owners of businesses can do, so many things the sector can do, and there are also all of the factors that the government will need to do as well. And we've all heard a lot about the need for far more testing, obviously, to be able, especially in the early stages. How is the government reacting as far as their support, at the federal, provincial, local level? I'm sure you're having lots of discussions.
So I would say that they're certainly taking the issue seriously. Our advocacy partners at the national level and provincial level, through TIO and NORMA, have regular and ongoing and productive conversations with every level of government. I would say that relief has been offered in many forms, and it's changing and being adjusted every day as we learn more about the impacts. We certainly need more. Businesses need more right now. As I said, with 30% of businesses polled predicting permanent closure by June, that is a massive economic hit, not just to this industry but to our economy. And again, we're a key driver. It's not just about serving visitors. We're a support sector for any number of different sectors that rely on our services and our infrastructure. So, government has been responsive. More is needed. I will say in the workforce side of the equation, the response has been very, very open and collaborative and solutions oriented. And so we're very pleased with that.
Great. Well, see if there's one more call for question. No more questions or raised hands in the chat. So I think, Adam, we want to keep this short today. Would love to do another check-in as we move forward in the weeks and months ahead. And we really appreciate your time, because I think everybody knows everybody's trying to do what they can. And I think one of the key messages that we've been hearing and taking away is collaboration is going to be so important. Everything really is interconnected in our current economy and society, and we all need to work together. And I think what we've been seeing is there's certainly a desire. Everybody realizes the importance of collaboration now more than ever, I think. So really appreciate you sharing your insights with us today. Thank you for your time. I'm sure we'll be chatting over the weeks to come. And thank you, everybody, for joining us on the call. And hopefully you'll join us again when we check in with Adam again in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.